Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this, the third of our webinars, our digital discussions all about Public Health England Prevention Concordat for Better Mental Health. My name is Rich Taunt.
My name's Lily Makura.
And I'm Andy Bell.
And we do like to give out prizes on these webinars. And today, Andy, a gold star for literally rushing in approximately 12 seconds before we started, which sets a new record for us at Kaleidoscope. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure.
So if you've joined our previous webinars, you'll know the broad structure in which we run these. We're going to hear a presentation. Andy, again, thank you for joining. We're going to hear a bit more about what the Prevention Concordat is. Lily, looking forward to that. But the main focus of today is discussions. We very much hope that you'll be sending us your comments, questions, clarifications, observations as we go through. And we'll talk just about how you can do that in 1 second. I say I work here at Kaleidoscope. We're a social enterprise set up to bring people together to improve health and care, and we're supporting Public Health England on this important set of events. So, how can you get involved today? There are 3 ways to join the discussion, and again, we'd very much like you to get involved. So first is to use the Ask a Question feature within GoToWebinar, which should be there hidden away in those controls on your panel. Second, if that doesn't work, don't worry. Just send us an email. hello@kaleidoscope.healthcare is your email address. Or third, if you're a Twitterer, a tweeter, whatever word you want to use, just tweet us using the hashtag Prevention Concordat. And if you're sitting there and your technology suddenly collapses for whatever reason, don't panic. We are recording today, as we have the 2 previous sessions, and so you can catch up at your leisure later on. Or you can also share them with your friends, family, relatives. They make excellent Christmas presents if you're interested in doing that sort of thing. So certainly yes, Andy, come on, corporate messaging.
Yes.
Excellent. So please do get involved today. Because the number of people involved on the call today, we're not taking sort of questions by voice, so please do send us input by text. I should have said at the beginning, so we're structuring this set of webinars predominantly around the 5 key areas for prevention planning as set out in Public Health England's Prevention Concordat planning resource. I'm very pleased today to be talking about needs and assets assessment, and Andy will be talking us through some of the work at the Centre for Mental Health shortly. But in terms of what this whole Prevention Concordat malarkey is all about, Lily, what is it? Why are we talking about it?
So I'm really pleased to be leading the work that Public Health England is taking forward on the Prevention Concordat. So what we would like and are encouraging everyone to join in on is making sure that every local area is better at their prevention planning arrangements. And so that's engaging across sector, whether that's local authority, businesses, employers, the NHS, voluntary sector and others, to make sure that you're all engaged in helping us deliver better work and interventions that are focused on preventing mental health problems, but also on protecting and promoting good mental health. So it's all of our business. And so the work of the Prevention Concordat is bringing people together, both at local level and nationally, so that we work together to make this a reality. We've already made some very good progress and got some very exciting news coming through from local areas about how they're already making this something that they're doing and building it into their future plans. And also a number of national organisations that have signed up to help make this a reality. We're particularly focused on making sure that we close health inequalities, and the evidence so far is that actually this work is already starting to do that and will continue to do that. But really importantly is that we make sure that this work is focused on local needs, and also that you tailor the work to fit those local needs and assets. So I'm really pleased that today that we're really going to be focused on evidence-based decision making, how you use things like the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment tool and other resources to help make this a reality for us all.
Thanks, Lily. Lots of signatures there. What are the signatures represent?
So the signatures represent a broad landscape at the moment. So at the moment we've got 30 signatories, and we'll be adding to those. And that's everyone from the Department of Health, going right the way across to the Children and Young People's Mental Health Alliance, who all again agreed that they will be supporting this work either from additional offers of training and support, or tailoring what they're doing, whether that's about conferences or the nature of the interventions that they promote. So local government association are also supportive, But we're also, again, working with NHS commissioners to see how we can move some of the investment that we're making in traditional models of care into more prevention-focused work. So obviously this hasn't happened overnight, and again, and it is part of a journey. And so for those who weren't already aware, we did start and haven't yet accessed some of the resources that are available. If you Google Prevention Concordat, it's actually at the top of the list. You can actually go through the journey of looking at either the evidence of what works at local or national level. Again, we're particularly focusing today on the JSNA work, but so I won't delve into that. But again, the resources are there, live, built on what we know works and has also been used locally. But we've also as well made sure that we are tailoring that, enable you to tailor that. So things like return on investment tools that you can use to make your business cases. And we're also in the process at the moment of going around the country, coinciding with these webinars, to make sure that every area has an opportunity to join us at learning events about how to make this a reality. We're about a quarter of the way through, we think, really. So we just had 2 brilliant face-to-face events with the vast majority of people actually saying that they would recommend to another colleague to come. So hopefully we may be meeting many of you in the next few weeks and months. But also these are digital conversations and discussions that are taking place. So our next, we were in Durham yesterday, we were joined by a range of people from, again, ranging from the police through to, say the local authorities, voluntary sectors and others, and also, sort of senior level buy-in from, different parts of Public Health England and the NHS as well. So that's great to see, and we want to encourage that to continue to happen.
Lovely, Lily, thank you. So if you've joined us previously in one of these digital discussions, welcome back. If you've been to one of the face-to-face events, I hope you found it a constructive experience. We certainly got a huge amount out of it. And looking forward to the next one of those, which is 1st of February in
London. Yes. And so, again, so far, there's been lots of conversations about the importance of partnership, and some partnerships being refreshed and built on literally at the events. But also as well, it was all being reminded that, taking this work forward will be a complete blend of making sure that we're looking at what's already working and building on that as our sort of cornerstone, but also adding to that with things that are new or innovative. But again, so adding to that evidence base of what works.
Okay, Lily, thank you very much indeed. Just to say, if you've stumbled here and are wondering how on earth do I sign up for either the face-to-face digital events, all the details are on the Prevention Concordat website. So just preventionconcordat.co.uk is your friend. One last reminder. In terms of joining the discussion today, 3 ways of doing that. Use the Ask a Question feature within GoToWebinar. If that doesn't work, send us an email on hello@kaleidoscope.healthcare or send us a tweet. Just use the hashtag Prevention Concordat. If anyone does want to suggest a snappier hashtag than Prevention Concordat, you're very welcome to. We're yet to come up with one.
There should be a prize for that.
There should be a prize for that. It's prizes for all. It's a good mental health intervention, I think.
So.
Yeah, excellent. So please do send us comments and questions as we go through. We would love to hear from you. Andy, JSNA, Joint Strategic Needs Assessment. We're looking forward to what you've got to say. What makes a good one? What is one in the first place if people haven't come across them?
Great.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. And good to have the chance to share some of our work on this webinar, but also to really find out what people have got that we don't know about yet, and looking forward to finding out more about that. So if you don't know us, we're Centre for Mental Health. We're an independent charity, and our work is really about using evidence and research to change people's lives and tackle and reduce inequalities in mental health. We've been doing that for a number of years, and we've been really delighted to, first of all, be a signatory to the Prevention Concordat, but also to have worked with PHE and colleagues here to produce some of the materials for it and do some of the background work. The piece of work we're talking about today is really just answering that question that actually came up in the event yesterday. Can a JSNA influence commissioning? Can you change people's lives? Can you change health in communities, starting from an assessment of local need? And I think what we'd come across before that is very often, because a joint strategic needs assessment is a statutory requirement on a local authority, it hasn't always had an influence either on strategies or on the commissioning plans that follow. Sometimes they felt like paper exercises people do because they've got to. It's got a lot of data. And it's hard to see the line between that and real change in communities and real decisions made by not just the local authority, but by CCGs, police and crime commissioners and others. So what we wanted to do is look at, can we find any examples of where a needs assessment in a local area has made an impact on how people live and the way services are organised. So we had a little trip. It was very nice. And
did you have a bus?
We should have, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
We should have one for the events we're doing,
Okay,
in fact,
we'll
that you kindly signed up earlier, and I'm sure people are already now signing up for. So really through a range of contacts, we found these 5 places: Blackburn with Darwen, Bradford, Haringey, Surrey and Swindon, not because we think they're better than other people, though I'm sure they will, but because we'd identified that they had really been able to make a difference through their joint strategic needs assessments. They were all quite different to one another. In Blackburn with Darwen, the focus was on children and young people's emotional well-being. And the picture on the right-hand side is of Blackburn. I took it when I was there just to prove it really happened. And the approach they took was very different to what we'd seen anywhere else. So I'm sure others may have picked it up since. Is rather than producing a JSNA full of data and numbers and graphs and doing it in a cupboard somewhere in the local authority, they went out and they talked particularly to children and young people in schools and in community groups to find out what is it that enhances your mental well-being? What is it that challenges it? What is it you find toxic? What is it you find positive? What can we do to help? And through that, they really co-produced a series of ideas and maps, and it's full of pictures. And it's really about starting from the perspective of the people who were interested in, rather than just looking at some graphs and tables. And what they were able to do through that is really identify the importance of adverse childhood events and the real fundamental cornerstones to mental health and well-being for children and young people that come from that. Bradford took the other end of the age spectrum and produced a really interesting health needs assessment for dementia. That's the picture at the bottom of, it was a lovely sunny day when I was there, which helped a lot.
Is that one of their interventions?
It certainly was for me. Okay. What Bradford did is really start on the basis that if you're going to improve support for people with dementia, first of all, you need to bring everyone with you in the community who has a role to play in that. So people with lived experience, families, voluntary sector organisations, health services, and they developed a steering group with leadership from the local authority, and they helped to produce the assessments, but they didn't then wait to produce a strategy afterwards. The strategy was embedded within the assessment, and then within that there were a series of not just actions, but how the system was going to be held to account and how it's going to be measured for achieving progress. That group still meets a good couple of years afterwards, and it's had a real sense of continuity. That they didn't just produce a needs assessment and then cross their fingers and hope things would happen. It really maintained momentum. So that's just a couple of examples of the ones we looked at, just to illustrate the kind of things that we're talking about. So from that, we're able to think about what are the things that really helps, what are the success factors, if you like, and as is the way nowadays, we produced an infographic to make it very, very easy. The first of those is really the importance of leadership. This doesn't necessarily mean someone with a senior position, but it means someone who can really be the advocate for it, make sure, first of all, that mental health has the focus in a needs assessment process, which doesn't always. Some areas don't have specific needs assessments for mental health, or they don't have a particularly high profile. So someone to champion it, and this is where the role of local elected members sometimes comes in, but it doesn't have to be. It's important then to have a process of engagement. Don't just write the JSNA internally, because you have to do it with people, do it in partnership, and particularly in partnership with a whole range of people who actually have a role to play, and make sure they feel part of it. It turns out to be really helpful when national policy is supportive. That often gives things a bit of impetus, particularly when there's money around. And the fact we now have the Prevention Concordat for mental health and the 5-year forward view for mental health means there's never been a better time to really focus on this issue and make sure you use those resources coming from the centre to really help to make sure things happen. The use of research evidence was often really important, because sometimes local data is a bit limited. what we found is that local authorities were very canny about finding, if we don't know the numbers for ourselves, let's look at what the research says and draw on that. So again, we're not having to recreate things that we don't have to, and we're really using research evidence that exists. And there's lots of it out there, and many of the resources that Public Health England have provided, particularly the return on investment tool, will be incredibly useful for that. Good presentation sounds obvious, but it's really important. None of the assessments we looked at were long. None of them were full of numbers. They tended to be well presented, clearly presented, short, easy to find. Don't make it, 6 clicks away on a website. Make it somewhere people can come to frequently. And it's good often to be able to change it as you learn more and you update information. So don't make it static. So presentation is really important. It just brings people in and makes people, again, feel they're part of something. Then it's really important to have a clear purpose for it. So again, doing it just because you have to is not a good reason for doing it. Doing it because you know what you want to achieve with it is fundamentally important. And I think particularly picking up the Blackburn example, work with people you're actually talking about. Don't write things about people. Nothing about us without us is a really important principle in mental health services. We need to bring that into public mental health as well. We shouldn't be talking about people's mental health in their absence, and we need to be co-producing the solutions. And then finally, following up. Don't just wait, don't just leave it, don't just hope. Make sure there is a real process once you've written your needs assessment for continuing it and making sure things really happen. So they're not quite rules, but they're success factors we found. Doubtless others will have experience that might challenge that, and that's good. And doubtless there's much more we can learn, but that's roughly what we found. Probably the one extra thing to say is that since we wrote this, we now have a fantastic resource on the Mental Health Intelligence Network, which provides a lot of the data. And there's 2 good things about that. One of which is that you've got a lot of stuff at your fingertips now that can provide local data. The second one of which is it means people can really focus their efforts on doing the things that only can be done locally. So doing the production, doing the co-production, doing the engagement, making it a real live process in the local area, rather than having to go around scratching around for bits of data, which very often we found people were having to do before. It's now there right at your fingertips, and I think that's a real bit of progress.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. So we'd very much welcome comments, questions, reflections. I've really succinctly put, Andy, thank you very much, huge amount of material in a very short space of time. Thank you.
Like a good JSNA.
Oh, gosh, we should have planned that. That would have been great. Just pretend it was planned. Lily, I'll come to you in 1 second, just in terms of some of these wider resources which are available to help people to produce their JSNA. But just one question to kick off, Andy. It seems that the standard conversation we'd have about a JSNA might well be, there's this document I need to produce, so I'll ask my analyst to go away and find some things to put in a document, and then we'll have done the document and we can get on with our lives. Yep. Whereas those from your examples you pulled out, you barely talked about quantitative data at all. Why do you think there's this sort of bit of a mismatch between people's perception of a JSNA and actually what good looks like?
I think in some ways we're learning as we go along, aren't we? I think that this is all about how you achieve change in a local area, and so it's really about what we know from experience about what really brings about change and what we perhaps thought in the past did. And we know that facts are important, we know data is important, we know people are influenced by things. That's why at the centre we produce a lot of research, but we also know that people are motivated by stories. People are very busy. There's a lot of competing issues trying to get attention of council members and leaders in local areas. Within the NHS, there's limited resource to go round. So we need to make sure the argument for mental health is persuasive, is clear, is easy to access, and really comes with a local flavour to it. Simply providing numbers, as shocking as they can sometimes be, doesn't really do the job in the intensely competitive world we're living in.
Lovely. Last one for me, and I think it's a question which just come through in terms of, so you produced this lovely tool. How do people access it? Where is it on your Centre for Mental Health website? Is it on Public Health website? How do people get hold of that?
So the report we produced of the research I've just talked about is on Centre for Mental Health website. It's called Meeting the Need. If you search Meeting the Need on our website, I promise you it comes up because I tested it this morning. So do have a look at the Centre for Mental Health website and you'll find it there. With the neat infographic. The main resources that people can use to produce their JSNA is available on the Mental Health Intelligence Network. Which is the perfect segue into Lily. There's a range of things people can access to support their JSNA process.
Yeah, so how to find the resources, and I think my other message as well is just reinforcing the point of use what it exists already, so you, as part of making your building blocks, both to, you know, learn on what works for you in your area, but also to build a really compelling case. So on the Prevention Concordat platform, which again you can access through Google, Prevention Concordat, we have also made sure we've done links to all of the key resources, such as Andy's report and the Centre for Mental Health Resources. You'll also be able to go directly through to the Mental Health Intelligence Fingertips tools, which again holds the platform for the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, which also gives you the information on the risks, needs, assets that are prevalent in your area, and you can choose what geography to use for that, and then again use that to build your compelling case. Similarly as well, through that link you can also get to the return on investment tool, and I've already heard from at least 3 areas in the last week where they just said, actually these resources are so good they just almost wrote the business case for me, which actually again is exactly what we wanted to be able to deliver with those, and so we're going to keep on iterating those as well. I'd also as part of the building the case and telling the compelling story, encourage people to look at some of the summaries that we've done on things like psychosocial approaches, which again are available through that very same link.
Lovely, great, Lily. Thank you very much indeed. So this is the point where I sort of come to you. Really welcome. Well, there's some questions or reflections on sort of our opening presentations, but particularly if you are sitting on a wonderful bit of practice in your local area. We would love to hear about it. So I think questions are already starting to come through. So one's coming through from Gareth Sheffield. Hello, Gareth. Thanks for joining. Gareth asking, are there any pieces of good research evidence you recommend specifically focusing on adults transitioning from long stay environments into the community? Andy?
Good question. And in terms of the research evidence, I mean, certainly around prevention, a lot of the evidence has been corralled through the Prevention Concordat website. So there'll be a lot of stuff there on the public health end. I think in terms of the specific question, I shall have to endeavour to go away and find some evidence. I think particularly if it's looking at good practice in that area, what we know is that there is a real problem, particularly for people who have been in locked rehabilitation, so-called services within the NHS, which we recently did a piece of work which has been followed up by the Care Quality Commission, which really identified a very significant block in the system and a very expensive block in the system, and one that actually we're quite keen to look at solutions for. We know there are some areas now which are trying to reduce the number of people who go out of area, mostly in acute crisis situations, but we need to start doing that for people in rehabilitation services as well with more long-term conditions, and we need to look at where there are examples of services that help those people to come back. But what we know from the little evidence we've got is that it's really important not to lose touch with people when they go out of area, not to allow placements to remain for forever and ever and ever. Clinical commissioning groups really have an important role in staying in touch with people and making sure there are arrangements to get people into housing as quickly as possible. Very happy to come back on that one in greater detail. Thanks,
Andy. And it's actually, let's use that as a springboard into this is a discussion not just about needs assessment, but about asset assessment as well, and sort of thinking about a challenge such as movement of individuals from long-stay environments to the community obviously involves that understanding of your broader community assets. And it give you interesting reflections, but that whole that whole task about how you accurately get a sense of the assets in your area and what might be being underused for promotion of good mental health. Andy, is that something you looked at in your report?
I think what we've found is that there's a number of areas now, and I think Blackburn did this very well, and I know Bracknell Forest is doing it very well, and I would suggest anyone who's interested in this question of community assets to have a look at Bracknell Forest. I'll tweet out the link afterwards. They've done some amazing work which is really about identifying what's out there in the community already. And what can they enhance that's out there, but perhaps needing a bit of extra support, really to kind of build up places where, for example, people who are particularly isolated can go. So it's assets which can include quite sophisticated things, but it can also include lunch clubs, sports activities, anything which is inclusive and particularly can support people who perhaps are having difficulties with their mental health or at risk of having mental health difficulties, without labelling that, without making it about mental health. Just here's a group of assets, here's a map of Bracknell Forest with the things that are available locally that you might be interested in, and then making sure GPs are aware of it. And this is really critical. Very often we find that there are good things available, but no one knows how to access them. And the places people tend to go to, universal services, don't always have that connection. So it's all about making sure that schools are aware, GPs are aware, places that people go to know how to plug people into the support that's around without ever needing a healthcare intervention.
Lovely. Let's come back to that point about awareness, Andy, in one second. I thought that was really nicely made. But since you, Lily, a couple of points. I think someone's just been asking, thank you very much for your question, about, could you say just a bit more about what the Mental Health Intelligence Network is and how that relates to the PHE Fingertips tool? There's lots of stuff, lots of acronyms flying around. If you could give a bit more detail on those, that would be lovely.
So the Mental Health Intelligence Network is our shorthand for making sure that there's one place that, whether you're working in the social or healthcare sector, or whether that's as a provider or a commissioner, or again, actually as a general member of the public, that you can go and find out the most up-to-date and accurate information about about what's going on relating to mental health in your area. And so there are some things which are the obvious pieces of information, which are about prevalence of particular conditions like depression or anxiety or other things like illness focused, but we've also gone 2, 3 and 4 steps further than that and corralled into that things like actually looking at things like the determinants of problems. So that might be about sort of domestic violence, it might be about looking at criminal justice and those sorts of issues, and then also linking into the assets and other protective factors, which are the things that again will actually help us resolve and prevent some of the problems happening in the first place. We've also started to map those in there, so we're looking at opportunities, some of which are very much in and around us anyway, which are about access to good and meaningful employment or safe and secure housing. Again, that bit I said at the beginning, which is about making this everybody's business to be part of the solution, is actually really vital and is indicated in all of those resources. So if you can, we use the shorthand as well, the fingertips tool, which again is a shorthand for, because this work therefore becomes all literally at your fingertips. And so again, there's another one opportunity that with probably an indicator of its success is that if you Google mental health intelligence fingertips, actually it is at the top of the list there. But we've also made sure, again, with all of our sort of other platforms like the Prevention Concordat, we link back in, so you'll never get lost.
Lovely. And we actually had, picking up that point, we had a discussion just yesterday in Durham, Ali, at the event there, about, I think a question was raised about, we're talking about the importance of national parks and trying to get a sense of the impact of national parks on mental health outcomes and whether there's data to support that.
Yeah, so one of the things we are looking at and continuing to develop is that looking at, can we have more data in one place linked to mental health that's about, the people's closeness to green spaces, because actually we do know that there's a positive impact on that, and again similarly actually with blue space as well. So again we're looking at how we can link those together as well, and again kind of watch this, well, not watch this space, but actually watch the intelligence network as we develop, and we'll be tweeting about that through the Public Health England website, as well as through things like national parks and other people who are again sort of getting on board and joining the Prevention Concordat movement.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. We're getting more questions coming through. Thank you very much for those. But Andy, I wonder if we can just turn back to that point about the power of the process of developing these. And you talked about Bradford and Blackburn, lovely examples of taking quite a creative approach to running that JSNA process in quite a different way. People might be listening and going, that sounds great, but where do I start? It's not an easy thing to do. Well, could you give a bit more detail about some of those places you looked at? How did they decide what they were going to do, and then what were some of their first steps to do it?
And again, there's nothing here that is an example of perfect, but I think by and large what happened is somebody has to begin the discussion. These things don't come out of a vacuum. It's generally an individual. It might be a member of the public health team. It might be a council member. It might be the director of social care. We've seen various examples. Somebody just says, we really need to focus a bit more on mental health. We need to look at this. I think we saw some great examples yesterday in Durham of people working in public health at senior or not senior levels who'd just taken this upon themselves and just begun the conversation. And I think there are more conversations about mental health now, and particularly prevention through the Concordat, which mean that there are lots of opportunities for anyone who cares about this to just get it going. But then it is about, rather than going off and doing this in isolation, about beginning to bring together the people that care about it. Again, there are a lot of those. Mental health goes across all areas of public service. So as Lily mentioned, housing is absolutely critical. So bring in housing providers, bring in social care, bring in the NHS, bring in the fire service, the police. You can build up very quickly a real coalition of people that really want things to happen. And remember to do that jointly with local service user organisations and community groups, churches, many, many more. All kinds of faith groups and all kinds of community organisations are really keen to be part of that conversation. And of course, that can be uncomfortable. It's much easier to do something within the organisation and get on with that quietly. But I think what we've seen really work is where you do reach out a bit more and you do create these real kind of strong coalitions of people that are willing and indeed sometimes very often desperately keen to work together. And of course it's not easy, but I think that way the needs assessment, and as people have said, assets as well. Possibly the phrase JSNA needs to change, but that assessment of what's around, linking in with strategies, really starts to motivate people, and you begin to see, actually, this isn't just a paper exercise. We can really do something here. We can make a difference. This isn't just because someone from government said we got to do it.
I don't think the phrase joint strategic needs assessment was created by a poet, was it?
I don't think so, no. Or if they were, they probably haven't yet got published.
Probably so, indeed. Great. We'd love reflections on language. If you think that there's actually a better way, which you are talking about this locally, or we could be talking about it, please do send in. And a lovely segue to a question which just come through. Thank you for this question about what good practice examples are available for collaboration between local, statutory and voluntary sectors. What can help these collaborative efforts to be successful? Really?
So we've summarised some of this, the evidence on this in one of our documents, which is Taking Local Action, but again also in the resources that have been developed by the Centre for Mental Health and also the Mental Health Foundation. I think what's really clear is that you need good local leadership. Now, classically, often people think at the top of the office. Now, that's absolutely important, but we also need a range of different types of people to be involved in that. So whether or not you're an elected member or you're the lead on a particular topic in your organisation, then I encourage you to take that sort of leadership role and help do that. The next step, which is about developing a shared vision, and to get there, the obvious journey is through actually identifying what your own outcomes are, target outcomes are, and actually where they overlap or are in common with others. And that's the really fertile ground actually for, given our focus on prevention and promotion here, that if anything, we can tie together our outcomes around that, whether or not you're in sort of blue light or crime sector, or you're in, sort of housing, social care, or health. Actually, again, we've got great opportunity there to do that about making sure that people have a reason to collaborate that actually makes this, again, part of their business.
And I think this was a really interesting discussion we had yesterday, Lily. That the breadth of people who were with us in Durham, I thought was wonderful. And that we had people from Newcastle United to the NHS to parks to police to councillors to charities.
And we had as well, I mean, again, you know, through the course of these webinars, we'll be talking about lots of different locations where they're doing really great work. But, you know, the standout one yesterday in particular was, you know, sort of the Middlesbrough, Redcar and Cleveland work, where they have, you know, over a number of years built a number of collaborations and are using those and adapting those to focus on mental health. And they do require work. You know, this is not something that you can just wake up tomorrow and say, right, let's just get everyone together in a room. It does require some sort of genuine and authentic involvement, again, which is where the leadership comes in. But again, I think that's where you know, the areas that are most successful at this will actually focus on the collaboration as much as the, you know, the speed of trying to get there.
Yeah, lovely. And I think someone yesterday was talking about, you know, you need to remember to oil your relationships.
Yes.
Actually, how do you keep those trusting relationships going, or how do you build them in the first place? Andy, something. Sorry, Andy.
No, I think we have to acknowledge that there is a huge power imbalance. Very often voluntary sector organisations have funding that lasts for about 5 minutes. So they're actually dependent on the organisations they're wanting to lobby. And that can be a difficult relationship. And I think it's really about the different sectors understanding the pressures one another are under. People in the voluntary sector often find it hard to understand just how much financial pressure local authorities are having to work with. Statutory organisations sometimes don't realise just how perilous life can be for a voluntary sector organisation, particularly a community-based one, with a very narrow funding stream. So I think it's really important that there is an understanding of the very different places they're coming from, and real efforts to kind of work within that framework. We've seen some superb examples of that. I mean, certainly looking at Haringey and the work of the Integrate movement, and if you've seen our recent report on Project Future, that really is an outstanding example of a voluntary sector organisation that has both sought funding from both NHS and local authority organisations in Haringey, but also sought to change the way they work and to have an influence back into the system. And I think, you know, there are examples around like that from many different parts of the country. Again, we need to keep building on and learning from those, but acknowledging it's difficult.
Andy, thank you very much. And that, I think that's a lovely point in terms of all of the information you need to put together a really good needs and assets assessment. The local authority isn't going to hold all of that. The statutory bodies aren't going to hold all of that. There is that necessary relationship between groups who will know certain populations far better than statutory bodies. There's nothing in legislation about JSNAs have to be produced by the council and only by the council. Or is there? Can local authorities work collaboratively with charities, patient groups to better understand?
I think they definitely can, and I was very impressed in Surrey that particularly wanted to focus on the needs of carers, who we know have a huge amount of vulnerability for their mental health and indeed physical health as well. There wasn't much data around, so they went to actually both statutory and voluntary sector organisations within the county to say, what data have you got? What can you tell us? What do you know? And that wasn't done to snoop or to try to kind of beat them down on their contract price next year, though there will have been some feeling that might have happened. But it was all about making sure they've got the most holistic understanding possible, and they've unturned all the stones that they can. But again, it also makes those organisations then feel involved in the process, and hopefully therefore more ownership of what comes out of it.
Lovely. So a question to both of you, if that's okay. And again, very much welcome questions, comments, reflections in the various ways you can do that. Which is we've started talking about what a good JSNA looks like. But I think you talked at the beginning of you mentioned at the beginning of your talk, Andy, the sort of the question we had yesterday about, you know, does this impact on commissioning? I think the question was actually put a bit more sharply than that in terms of has this ever do anything? Does it ever make a difference? Lily, how would you measure the success of a JSNA? Have you seen any particularly good examples of areas thinking creatively about, we've got this thing, how do we know if it's actually working?
Well, I think the indicator of success is that actually you've got a range of different organisations around the table contributing to the needs assessment and also therefore contributing to its delivery. And by that, I don't necessarily actually also automatically mean that this is all about commissioning. Some of the things, again, if you're looking at assets such as community-based resources and the strengths of some communities actually are not something that necessarily need money to make sure that it happens, but it helps, but isn't a guarantee. And so again, the most creative ones, I'm thinking sort of Blackburn with Darwin, I'm thinking Wigan, some places where actually the Northwest is quite a fertile ground in that sense, is that where they've again also been very creative. They've used things like sort of focus groups and drawing intelligence from the communities that people are wanting to work with, but also have managed to access things like the Citizens Advice Bureau hold a data, now share their database called Joining the Dots, which again allows people to pull out some additional information on particular groups and things where otherwise you wouldn't actually be able to get hold of that information, and also then have a way to actually make the intervention happen well.
Lovely. And Andy?
Just a couple of thoughts really in addition to that, one of which is the best examples I've seen have been the ones that have actually set their objectives and their measures while they've been doing it, while you've got people around the table. Don't do the needs assessment and then think, well, what are we going to do with this? Actually, have the process of saying, well, what are our objectives and how are we going to hold ourselves accountable for it, and having that sense of accountability to one another. Because the reality is we have a health and care system where there isn't much accountability, and organisations, particularly in the NHS, actually have an enormous amount of room to manoeuvre. As long as they meet certain targets, and so that ability to come together and say we are going to hold one another accountable, and we're going to do that collectively, and I think that's really important. The other, from an area I will not mention, is one of the strongest things I heard is a sense that by finding out what's really valuable for people and what really is there at the moment that is helping people, or perhaps is there that should be there that isn't. It really helps to focus minds on what you don't cut. We know local authorities are under enormous pressure and they're all having to make savings and they're all having to cut services. And I think what we've seen from some examples that I've come across is they've realised that a particular service or a particular type of support is incredibly valued. And that stopped it from getting axed when perhaps it might otherwise have got lost. So I think there is something about really knowing what you've got now that's of value to people, and really making sure that you don't lose that, but also potentially to find out what's not working and perhaps what we can recommission and do differently, and what's at a small scale but perhaps we need to do more of. So I think it's some of those examples that can only come from really understanding how people are experiencing things.
Lovely. And Lily, back to you, the importance of a really good needs assessment when all statutory services are having to make difficult financial decisions.
I mean, again, it hardly goes without saying that there are some very difficult decisions to be made, and now is it's never is there in a time when it's been like as tough as it has, but then it does bring you back to the sort of idea of evidence-based decision making, and again, things like knowing your data and the intelligence for your area is actually vital.
Excellent. Good. And going back to some of those good examples you talked about earlier, Andy, were those areas which you were looking at which were doing this particularly well, were they, how am I trying to say this, were they expensive processes? Were they having to truck lots of resource? Is it basically you get what you pay for, or are there ways you can do this which isn't going to have a massive financial impact on your budget, just in terms of how you run a good process like that?
I think one of the hardest things I had to hear was one local area who described a process that they said they probably couldn't afford to do now. Okay. And I think that was absolutely heartbreaking. But I think the reality is, because there is now so much data available, the Public Health England have pulled together through the Concordat, there are now resources that mean you can really focus on doing the things that add value locally and that only can be done locally. And I think there is an absolute case for saying that you'll get better value for money, partly by using the research evidence about things we know that are good value for money generally and are evidence-based, so that you're not spending money on things for which there is no compelling evidence. But also that by really understanding the community's perspectives, you're probably going to end up again with services that meet people's needs more effectively. So I think there is undoubtedly a value for money argument for this kind of approach. But we shouldn't pretend it comes cheaply. And inevitably, if you do it cutting corners, you're not necessarily going to get the results out. So I think it is a case of valuing this, but making sure that you're not duplicating effort by doing a whole range of things that perhaps you feel you've got to do, but don't really add value.
And goes back to that point about trying to work for organisations to share data and be open.
Yeah,
it's going to be essential in a constrained world. I've just had another question too. Thank you very much. This one's from Voss. Voss, thanks very much for joining. Who asks, what ways can local JSNAs inform policy making at a national level? Really?
Well, I think one of the interesting exchanges between local and national, particularly in recent years, has been about almost that sort of local up approach that particularly that we're trying to encourage around public mental health. So I think I always like to sort of flag that, remember locally we have a number of local politicians, elected members. They're politicians, of all colours and shapes and leanings. And actually, that's a really good way if we can actually make sure that they're very well informed, up to date with both, the intelligence and trends that are happening in their areas and how that's affecting their communities that they are, sort of serving. But again, that's a very good and useful way of making sure that that's being fed through both to, sort of organisations such as those sort of public health organisations like Public Health England, but also through to the wider political system. And again, that's kind of actually, kind of just a sound approach that you can make sure that your voice is heard by using the data and intelligence and using the system that can bring local experiences and voices to national.
Lovely, thank you. And Andy, taking that point about how multiple local JSNAs can be looked at across an area, I'm really interested if you've done any work at the Centre about STPs, sustainability and transformation. Is it partnerships this week?
Now,
partnerships
yes. There'll be something else next week.
Ponies next week, I've heard.
Yes,
book your slot.
People like ponies.
Yeah, indeed they do. Although evidence is questionable, apparently. We learned yesterday.
So we found out.
No, we did. That's a big aside there. But the use of so these STPs, these plans are all about trying to best meet need across an area. Have you seen good examples where either with an STP process or people have used existing data sources creatively to inform those plans?
I'd like to see it. I think I'm yet to see an example of where an STP, particularly the original plans, which were done quite quickly in 2016. I've yet to see an example of where they've really drawn, particularly from JSNAs or other forms of local authority needs assessment, partly because the geographies are different, and partly because STPs have predominantly been a very NHS-led process, and local authorities have often found themselves on the outer edges. Not in all cases. Some have been much more integral than others. So I think there's certainly a job to be done there, influencing at the STP level and making sure that where we've got really good intelligence about mental health in a local area, that really is feeding into that big important process happening at the moment, particularly where we're seeing the creation of accountable care systems. There's a real danger that we miss the boat on that, and that would be a tragic miss.
Lovely. And so if you're sitting there, possibly you work in an SDP or a accountable care system, an ACS, or some other acronym you'd like to share with us, which does the same thing.
Don't share any acronyms. Don't want any.
We're not after the acronyms, but certainly if there's an example of good practice from your area in terms of how people have built on JSNAs or other creative use of data, then it'd be great to hear about those. If you're watching back and you're not able to join live, you can still email us, hello@clydescope.healthcare. I would love to hear your examples. And Lily, STPs, I always have to, sustainability and transformation partnerships, these big NHS plans, how big a role do they have to play for better mental health, prevention of mental health problems?
Oh, in a sense, they're a cornerstone, but also whether they exist or whether you're actively involved in an STP in your area or not should not stop you taking action. So, the way that we are encouraging STPs to work together with local organisations and with the sort of national system is to make sure that they're looking at actually how, as a larger patch, that again, whether that's particularly about commissioning, but actually how to make sure that the right proportion, as in there's a level of parity about what's invested in mental health is as number one, and then also in number two, that actually that then a proportion of that is actually made sure that that is secured for prevention focused activity.
Really, thank you very much. We've got about 8 minutes left, not very long at all. So if you've got any final questions, reflections, please do throw those in. I'm going to give both our speakers a couple of minutes, so I'll give advance warning of questions we're going to ask. It'd be nice just to think of it a bit practically about how you produce a good needs assessment. So if you're sitting there in a local area, you know yours isn't great, and you're wondering, all right, where do I start? I'd really like, Lily and then Andy, your top 3 practical tips about where you start. If you're in an area, you want to do something different, you haven't done it, possibly haven't done it brilliantly before, where do you start? I will stall for time slightly, just to give Lily and Andy a little bit of more time to think. But we've heard about this sort of range of success factors related to good JSNAs. We've talked about how some of the real success of these documents is that you see real change, whether that's in commissioning or otherwise, and just the importance of using the requirement to do one of these assessments, the process in which you do that to bring different organisations together, which is useful in terms of doing a needs assessment, but of course has real value as well, just in terms of bringing people together and aligning approaches. But 3 practical tips about where you would start. Lily.
Well, I'd start with number one, being very clear about your objective as to why you actually want to, what sort of change you're wanting to achieve, who you want to engage. Then secondly, even if you think you know your area or your population really well, then go back to, take a step back, look at the data and intelligence. As we've said, lots of resources on that in terms of the mental health intelligence fingertips tool, as well as the resources that are available through a range of different voluntary sector partners. And then thirdly, actually don't do this alone. So that may be by, working with your local public health department, or it may be working with other colleagues, whether that's in sort of commissioning or other parts of the voluntary sector or other parts of sort of local authority or NHS. Just make sure that, again, that more people who are on board with this, actually, again, that you're more likely to come out with an outcome that is rich in its accuracy, as well as the likelihood of being able to do something useful with it.
Lovely. And Andy, were those your 3, or do you have a?
Yeah, I've got nothing more to say.
Okay.
I would agree with all of those 3, and I suppose all I would add to it is first of all, go and see what some other people have done, and we've seen some great examples of JSNAs that come in the form of a PowerPoint presentation. Now that may sound incredibly reductionist, and of course there's lots and lots and lots of detail living underneath it, but actually a kind of 20-page PowerPoint can sometimes make a huge amount of difference. I think there's something about just thinking about creative ways in which you can present this and working towards that. It begins to make it partly feel a bit less like climbing a humongous mountain. Because actually it's very difficult to write short compared to writing long, but it means that you know that there's a very clear sense of where you're going with it and what might be done. I think certainly reaching out to people who are living in communities and either experiencing mental health difficulties themselves and acknowledge so, or groups who are at risk, and just really beginning those conversations. A great exercise I came across in Lambeth, where they just put a map up of the borough and asked people to say, what is it within this borough that you go to when you need help with your mental health? Very few of those things were acknowledged mental health services. And so just beginning to understand things in a very different way. That's only 2.
Well,
so between us, you've got 5.
That's 5, and sorry, and that's just a lovely little example there. What were some of the places which people put down in London? It
was libraries, it was Sure Start centres, it was schools, it was parks. Almost anything that you can see that would have a beneficial effect on someone's mental health and well-being. I guess my final point, thinking about it, and it is a very important practical point, is we need to remember inequalities, and we need to make sure that process of engagement and understanding of the local community, it includes a specific focus on groups of people who the evidence suggests have a poorer experience. and we need to make sure that really underpins all of this activity, that there's a real understanding of the inequalities that we have within our community and where we can begin to make a dent in those.
You have those wonderful stats, not wonderful, but even within the richest boroughs in London, the sort of the disparities and inequalities within.
Indeed.
Excellent, Andy, thank you. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I think we've had a really good conversation. Thank you. I'm going to turn to my panelists in just a second and just ask for one closing reflection, one thought which is particularly stuck out from today, and then we will close. Just to say that our next webinar is next week. It's all about translating need into deliverable commitments. Actually, once you've done all this, and once you know your population, how do you actually make it happen? So we hope you join us for that. Again, all the details on preventionconcordat.com. So one closing reflection. I'll take chair prerogative and go first, so I can. But for me, I just want to come back to that point about what a JSNA is, and that I'm really struck by how your most successful examples, I think, were barely anything like what we tend to think of a JSNA, this very numbers-driven, long document, and so how people can be sort of empowered to have the creativity to do something actually quite different. I'm really struck by that point. Lily?
I was really struck by the point about the collaboration from the question that came up. So, I think there's something really important about, partners who are doing joint strategic needs assessments and the action that follows that, agreeing to be accountable to each other, and then also collaborating so that we get better outcomes and a greater opportunity to close inequalities.
Great, thank you. Andy?
Okay, my challenge for this, and it's one I think probably for us more than anything, is the question about how you use these things that people put a lot of effort into to have a national influence. And I think there's a lot more that we could do to begin to understand what's coming out of local needs assessments of whatever kind, some of the key messages, some of the learning, some of the intelligence, and how can we begin to use that to have an influence on what's being done nationally. And I don't just mean within mental health. I'm thinking about many of the conversations we've had at the events we've been to in Durham and Bristol have been about a wide range of policies and influences on people's lives, housing, employment, social security. We need to begin to kind of aggregate from this wealth of data that's being collected in local areas and knowledge, what that means about how we're embedding mental health across the whole of government policy.
Okay, if only there was some sort of national policymaker at some sort of public health representative body for England, anywhere we could talk to about such a suggestion.
We should definitely do that.
I think we should. We'll track someone down, and then we'll have that conversation. We will close there. Thank you once again very much for joining, and we hope to see you either at upcoming face-to-face or digital events. Thanks again. Goodbye.